CBC hiding a partisan Liberal hit job. I'm Brian Lilly with the Rebel.media. We've all heard about CBC's pending launch of an opinion vertical. Essentially, they want to replicate the opinion pages of newspapers like the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, the Sun, and put them on the state broadcaster's website, even though it's well outside of their mandate. Well, if what happened over the weekend is any indication of things to come, it won't go well for the state broadcaster, despite their $1.5 billion subsidy, as we've now been corrected by the Senate on that. This is something of a disaster over the weekend. They did a hit piece, a smear job on the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and failed to tell you a very important thing about the author, who he works for. We'll get to why that matters in a moment. The piece was written by a man named Dougal Lamont, and he took issue with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, saying MPs and the media should just start ignoring this group because they only have 5 members. Now, it's true, the CTF only has 5 members, but they've got 90,000 donors. They raised more than $4 million last year to help pay for their work where they stand up for Canadian taxpayers. So how do they only have 5 members? That is done on purpose and was a design of the CTF when they were set up years ago to make sure that outside groups couldn't just buy up memberships, hostile groups couldn't do a takeover of the organization. So they keep it small, and although you can be a supporter, although you can be a donor, you can't be a member. They don't seem to have trouble raising money. As I said, more than $4 million last year to help pay for their operations. Canadians support this group. That is important in and of itself. But to Dougal Lamont, that 5-member rule, well, that means they should be done away with, ignored. Now we get to the point of who Dougal Lamont is. CBC initially just described him as a lecturer at the University of Winnipeg and a longtime Liberal working in policy and communications. What they failed to tell you is that his current job is working as a policy advisor to a Liberal MP, Robert-Falcon, and that is key. This was a partisan Liberal piece that drove a Liberal agenda. They don't like being questioned by the CTF right now. Now, in fairness, the CTF took on the Conservatives, they've taken on NDP governments across the country, and they're going to take on the Liberals. They are scrupulous in being a nonpartisan organization that looks after donors' money, that looks after taxpayers' money. And that is what irks Dougal Lamont. He doesn't like it being called taxpayers' money. He doesn't like this organization. He thinks they're right-wing and should be ignored. But CBC doing a hit piece on a respected institution like taxpayers, a respected institution that CBC journalists often call on without identifying the person writing it as a Liberal partisan, as a Liberal MP's employee, well, that's a disaster. But this is what we can expect from CBC going forward, I suppose. Are they just going to turn to clickbait? That's the worry being expressed in places like iPolitics, and writers like Stephen Marr, who had defended CBC in the past, now worried that they're just going after clickbait. You heard it a couple of weeks ago. We played you the audio of the Heritage Committee meeting where John Honderich of Toronto Star and James Baxter from iPolitics took them on. Honderich actually says that CBC is becoming the biggest competitor for his newspaper.
Who is our biggest newspaper competitor today? CBC.
Yeah.
CBC.ca. Spending incredibly on its website, unlimited resources, and able to take advertising. You want to deal with an issue, you can look at the BBC model, where in fact they have exactly the same situation, and they built up a huge digital presence, but on the BBC, they're not allowed to take advertising. There's an issue for you to discuss.
And then, of course, there was Baxter's famous quote, "He's a startup, and they are an uber predator."
While the CBC has done many wonderful things, it is important to know that from my vantage point, it is not some wonderful benevolent entity. It is an uber predator. Because of the nature of its web content, the CBC is not out there competing with Huffington Post and CNN. It is competing directly with the Globe and Mail, Post Media, and yes, iPolitics.
Well, what can be done? Well, First, you could join us in calling for CBC to be sold off. That's always been my answer to it. I haven't said shut them down. I've just said sell them off to the private sector. We don't have a government grocery store. We don't need a government broadcaster. It's not that important a function of society. CBC could be sold off to the highest bidder and Canadian content would still be produced. You can sign our petition at sellcbc.ca, or just make sure that you're calling on your MP to have CBC rein itself in, stick to their knitting, put the money that we give them into the radio and television broadcasting they keep saying they have to cut, rather than going into areas like this where they clearly have no business. Hey, if you like what you just saw, make sure you never miss a Rebel video again. Click subscribe for our YouTube channel, or go on over to therebel.media and become a member. You'll be able to access premium content that only the members can get. Remember, we rely on our members for support. We don't get the $1 billion a year like the other guys.